So let's switch our conversation. We have a guest in the studio. Cyprian Nyamwamu is the director of Future of Kenya Foundation. Cyprian, good morning.
Morning, Latif and the great city. I'm great. I'm fine.
Very good.
Yes.
The great city. Cyprian is great.
Well, I'm happy to meet the great Cyprian.
Cyprian, you are the director of Future of Kenya Foundation.
Yes.
What does that mean? Are you the director of the foundation of the Future of Kenya? Or are you the director of the Future of Kenya's foundation?
The Future of Kenya Foundation is a policy think tank. I am just the director of the foundation.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's a policy think tank.
Yeah.
You'll tell us more about that.
Tank, yes.
Let's City welcome you with the day's proverb.
Okay. Our proverbs for the whole of this week come from the country of Kenya. Some of you may have heard of it. It's nestled in East Africa. And its neighbors are Somalia.
Does it have a prime minister?
It used to. It has had two prime ministers in its history, around the time of independence. And in 2008, it had also a prime minister.
Okay.
But they keep talking about having another prime minister.
Okay.
Yeah, but that talk just has remained there. It's talk.
Okay.
Okay. Do not say the first thing that comes to your mind.
Do not say the first thing that comes to your mind.
Yes.
Are you sure that's a Kenyan proverb?
It is a proverb. If proverbs were heeded to, do you know that they would actually lose the luster? They would actually not have the oomph that they actually have. Because it would be commonplace. People would be doing what needs to be done. And so all the cryptic messaging around proverbs would not exist. But the fact that a proverb is what it is, it means whatever it is trying to bring into being is not adhered to.
It's something that doesn't exist.
No, it's not normal. It's not commonplace. Yes.
Cyprian, the Wahenga of Kenya came up with that proverb.
Yeah.
What's your interpretation of it? What are they saying?
It basically means that don't be like our deputy president, who says the first thing that because you've not chewed over it, you need to chew over something before you swallow it. And if you don't follow that proverb, because proverbs are supposed to domicile wisdom, then you are going to cause a lot of stomach aches and a lot of indigestion and pain, really.
But I really have to ask, at what point do you demarcate between somebody who shoots straight from the hips and someone who speaks their mind and someone who doesn't think before they speak? How do you decide?
Yeah.
Which is which?
Then you can use Kibaki and contrast him with the deputy president, because Kibaki used to speak his mind, but he rarely used to speak on anything. He used to hear something and they would stay with it for a few weeks, sometimes months, until people would start asking, is the president still in the republic? And when you see him next in a function, he behaves like he has even forgotten the papers he had written on, and finally he says what he wanted to say.
But was that not a factor of his that was predetermined by his predecessor? Because his predecessor didn't lose any opportunity to speak. Spoke on everything and every subject.
And that was problematic.
Again.
Was he speaking his mind, or was he speaking before thinking?
Exactly. And if you say it's problematic, for whom was it problematic? Because the history that followed when we had a new president, the question was, why aren't we hearing him speak?
This man is too quiet.
So,
his hands off, everything off.
Yes. Some of these issues bring about dialectical questions. You wonder now, which is which? Is it this or is it the other? Is it the other? Anyway. Eric?
Cyprian.
Yes.
So, in this think tank, what exactly do you deal with? What kind of policy issues do you focus on?
We believe that the political economy rests on 5 pillars. It is about the economy itself. It is about the institutions that we have established. It is about the policies and laws that we've put in place. It goes to the socio processes like our education and our service provision. And finally, it deals with the international component of it. So we study those 5, and we advise institutions that listen to us, and those that have listened to us have not done badly. They have done well.
So everybody should be advised to listen to you.
We would urge them to listen because we spend time and apply the tools that are useful. Yes.
There's an article a post that's been doing the rounds on social media, and this has come from your Facebook page that's been shared around, where you say Kenya's problem is not Ruto. It is not Raila. It is not Uhuru Kenyatta or Kibaki or Moi before them. It's not even Mzee Kenyatta. It's the system and foundations that the global imperialist capitalist system established more than 130 years ago through a company called the Imperial British East African Company. Kenya is still a company. Recently, Rigiji said the winners of elections are the owners of this company. Can you imagine the audacity? The deficiency with Ruto and these political power wielders or barons we have listed above is that they know the solution, but they do not want to deliver the solution. Why? Because they benefit from the prevailing system, and you're calling this system deprivation, oppression, pauperization, and exploitation. Dope.
It's a system that dopes us. Something that dopes you, first of all, makes you feel like it's a great thing. But once you're hooked, you don't easily come out of it. And it is dope because it obfuscates, it covers up. You don't see what is inside. And that has been so for many years, at least for Kenya. And it is devastating. The problem is that the system has educated all of us not to actually see why we were educated that way. And the outcome, you will see at the end of that article, the outcome is that we are a big supermarket. And all that remains that we produce here is for other people. A few years ago, about I think 8 years ago, we were looking at the first classes, the people who did first class in our universities here. Very few of them are in the Republic of Kenya. They have all gone to, like my year mates, some of them are lecturing in the University of Leeds, others are out there in Stanford and everywhere else. Because nobody who gets the education that we get here is for this place. Because then they will build this place. So this is a country, and I'm sure it is similar in a lot of African countries, Nigeria, wherever you go to. The education system we get is to get us out of this place so that nobody stays here to build this place. Because if people stay and build this place, it is not going to allow for a lot of idiots to run our systems, our governance. So when you look at
Kenya, those
Kenya,
idiots the product of the same system?
I'm talking about a lot of them are products of the same system. And the people who have stayed here and who are in charge of government and in charge of the system like it the way it is because they benefit directly from this system. But it doesn't benefit the people of Kenya. So if it goes on like this, it will take years. But the way then it is positioned, it is made to look like the problem is William Ruto or Uhuru or Raila. And so we concentrate on that. So half of Kenya believes that Kenya's problem is Raila. Half of Kenya believes the problem is William Ruto. That's a simplification. In fact, I call it oversimplification of the problem. And then the Wazungus then say, look, you can't even manage your economy. You can't even manage your universities. They are closing down. You can't manage your healthcare system. These guys have to come over to be treated in our places. But they know exactly why this thing doesn't work.
So it's a system that they planted 150 years ago.
Yes.
The Imperial British East Africa Company, like you've said, when it came to Kenya and the region, those were entrepreneurs who were seeking opportunity.
They were ruffians. They were actually the riffraff. These were criminals, prisoners, all these people who could not fit in that society. These are the people who were trusted enough to come over. But what do we do to our Mongikis and ruffians? We kill them.
They came over and were good enough to establish a system that you call the dope system. And then this system went through the colonial government. Kenyans rose up and pushed back against the colonial government. Kenyans gained independence, and this system was then taken over by Kenyans. Or are you saying that the descendants of the Imperial British East Africa Company are the ones who are still in charge of this system?
Muga, who took over at independence, it was the people who had been prepared by the colonial system to take over. The first rally Kenyatta had in Nakuru with the settlers was the first thing he was told to say was to say that we are not going to chase away anyone. Because you are white, we are not going to send you away. In fact, what we did is that we borrowed. The first loan we got from Britain was to pay settlers. Can you imagine that?
Yes.
The people who had deprived us of our land and forced us to work on their land, we borrowed money from them so that we can pay them to stay.
Actually, the money was so that we could buy off
our land
those
from
who had. True, everything you say is true, but the history of the British East Africa Company, the British East India Company, remember, colonization was a business.
It was.
Okay. And very straightforward business of ensuring you extract as much resources as you can. The partition of Africa, all that, that's what it was for. A simple, straightforward extraction of wealth so that the countries that were extracting could benefit.
Sure.
And there are those who've argued that the West was built on these very same extraction. Then they threw in slavery just for good measure. But remember, those are things they had been doing among themselves for the longest time. So it's like they practiced in themselves, then crossed the seas to come to us.
They had honed.
Yes. Now, what the British East Africa Company did, whatever charter they had, because remember, these charters were given by the sovereign, the queen, king, whoever it is, who was the omnipotent leader of that particular establishment. They then handed over this charter to the government, the British government. Now, just like we sometimes hear of government settlement schemes, Kenya was a settlement scheme.
It was.
It was. So, if you wanted to move away from Britain, you were brought here. Now, there are those who argue among the nobility, those among the nobility whom nobody wanted, they were a bit of an embarrassment to everybody. You found places to take them.
Yeah.
Just like Australia was a penal colony. Really hardened criminals who could not change no matter what you poured on them or whatever you gave them.
Down
Australia. And some also America. All I'm saying is, at that particular point in time, that was how that particular world operated.
Okay.
Now, according to Cyprian's assertions, the 17 years Jomo Kenyatta spent in the UK, he's implying that Jomo Kenyatta was being indoctrinated, so that when he came back, he was a puppet of that particular system. Okay?
I'm not implying, I'm saying it.
Okay. So then I think, so from there, are we essentially saying that today, in current day Kenya and many other states that then were formed after colonization, that the problems that Kenya seeks today, and look across board, whether you're looking at issues of governance, whether you're looking at issues of development and policy, whether you're looking, across board, that Kenya continues to suffer in the manner in which she does because of the shackles of colonialism?
Exactly, because the system was unbroken. Muga has just said it was a business. That's why they built the railway. The railway was supposed to pay for itself and extract and move things out. That hasn't changed. This was established, and there's something Muga should have added, that Kenya was one of the 3 settler colonies in Africa. Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa. In those 3 settler colonies, the vision was actually that they were not going away. That's why in those 3 countries, you see that there was actually military intervention. There was violent resistance for these guys to be pushed out. And so the way the economy, if we can talk about those 3, the way the economy, the education system, the healthcare system, everything was set up, it was set up to ensure that even when the whites have left, we're only going to get flag independence. But the economy and the productive system was going to continue to benefit. So in political economy, there's what we call the periphery of capitalism, and then there's the core, or the center of capitalism. So the way it works is that everything that we produce here of value is supposed to go to the market in the core of capital. Coffee, those mamas who pluck coffee in Nyeri don't take coffee in the morning for breakfast.
Why don't they take coffee?
Because they only harvest beans so that they can sell the beans. All right? They don't have machines to grind coffee and use it. They pick coffee. They are paid a little bit of it. They sell everything. That happens for tea. That happens for pyrethrum. That happens for flowers that we produce here. That happens for the brains that we produce in our universities. That happens for our minerals. That happens for our oil in Turkana, whatever's in Tana River.
Can I interrupt you? I'm listening to the trajectory of your thought process. So, are you saying that we are in this hopeless vortex where we are perpetuating exactly what the colonialists brought in, and that those whom we have in leadership are the ones who are now doing the very same thing?
They're nyaparas.
Okay, now.
I don't know what we call nyaparas in English, but in the tea estates...
They're the supervisors.
The supervisors. Their work is to ensure that the natives do not revolt against the system.
So they're just enforcers for the system.
They are enforcers.
Really?
Are they aware that they're doing this? Or
they know very well.
They
are so aware that they actually receive a payment for that.
From whom?
From them. From the owners of the system.
From the plantation owner.
Yes, from the plantation owner.
Okay, so let me say this plainly so that we're all on the same page. What you're saying is that in countries whereby colonialism happened, right? And then these countries then gained flag independence. We also understand that in a lot of countries there was colonialism and then there was complete assimilation, right?
Like the French.
Like the French, especially.
The French,
okay?
Yeah.
Right, and so some colonies obviously did not have that, but some did. So when they gained what you're calling flag independence now, essentially they left, quote unquote. A lot of it remained behind. So we are saying that even going through the electoral process of voting and putting in a leader is still until today very much controlled by these colonialists still.
100%.
And they are putting the people that they want
in office
into office, and they're receiving a stipend. It must be pretty. They're receiving a stipend for perpetuating their governance policies in these countries till today.
Massively. Let me tell you, our military is still colonial. Even our Africa Union that we pretend that we are having Africa Union at Addis, 83% of the budget is foreign funded. You understand? In fact, the moment all our 55 presidents arrive for the AU in January, they are paid $50,000 cash on the spot as the allowance for attending those meetings.
By the AU?
Quote unquote by the AU.
Okay.
But
all that is money that is coming from the Japanese, from the Americans, from the Chinese, from the Germans. The Germans, so they have specialized. There are people who are in, medicines and bio. There are others who are in security like the Americans. There are others who are in technology and all that. So this has been divided. We have not even started to decolonize this country at all.
Cyprian, where's the problem if the presidents receive $50,000 for a meeting? It's called per diem.
Yes, it is. The question is this: why is British tax being used to pay allowances to my president when he goes to meetings. There must be a catch there.
But is it taxpayers' money or is it business money? Because if it's just money, do we know that it's the British government or the American government or the Japanese government, or is it the businesses in the country? I mean, if indeed what you're saying is actually true.
Whoever, not even what I'm saying could be true. That is what happens every January and always.
If you insist, I will then say that, do you have evidence? That's the next question I'm going to ask.
Evidence
is there a list that is passed on when the presidents are sitting?
They sign. Yes, I received.
You sign date.
but I think you're right. Udu, so what is happening is that you look at Nigeria or any of these countries, the assimilation of the 16 French colonies, for example, they don't even run central banks.
No, they don't.
They don't. They don't even run central banks. And the gendarmeries and the militaries, the French military is still in their capitals. So any time an African country gets a leadership that is saying, I am going to decolonize this place, what happens to them? They're overthrown.
But do they really want to decolonize? This African leadership thing and decolonizing is suspect.
No, we are giving examples of people like Thomas Sankara, probably those who do not fit and do not allow to continue the facilitation.
Muammar Gaddafi.
The Muammar Gaddafis and then so.
You know where I'm going with this?
Yes.
What you're saying has traction, and it points to something that has happened on this continent for the longest time. But we are not the only continent where colonization took place. It took place in India.
That's an important question. Because in India, the penetration did not happen.
Why?
At all. They didn't even embrace English. If you go to countries like India, they did not change their religion. They did not give up their economy.
Or their culture.
Or their culture.
So it failed.
It failed completely. So
colonialization failed in India.
Exactly. So even their liberal democracy that they adopted in these countries, even the economies and how they continued after colonialism, is that they completely went back to the basis of India as a civilization. Wherever you go to, where there was colonialism, unlike Africa, where there was complete penetration, the state and the economy, and that's where we come back to Kenya. We say that Kenya is a railway state and a railway economy, because the way the railway was built, everything in terms of education, healthcare, all the provincial hospitals, the national schools, whether you're talking about Maseno, you're talking about Alliance, Mangu, whichever, all of them are on the railway. All our military barracks, they are just on the railway. Everything was established on the railway for the economies of scale and the efficiency of extraction.
You're right. Mention the road also.
The road?
Yes.
Excellent. So then 1965, President Kibaki, Tom Mboya, they come and establish sessional paper number 10 of 1965, which says that, those places up there in the north are not productive. So put everything on the railway, because then the return on every shilling is higher. Those places, a road has only arrived in Moyale in which year was that? 2011.
It's in this century, yes.
No, every time I went to Moyale, there was no road.
After the new constitution.
After the new constitution.
In this century, not the previous one.
Yes.
Yeah, in this century.
A decade into the new century.
Yes. Exactly. So what I'm saying is that you then hear narratives that I have said, Ruto then uses religion to move us away from discussing the problem, and Raila uses liberal democracy.
So these people are basically working as puppets for the system.
And none of them, listen to them, read their manifestos. That's the work I do, is to do policy analysis and read the manifestos and look at what they're proposing. Is absolutely endorsing the very, Washington consensus. Nothing changes in anything that they propose. So this one keeps us glued on elections and the liberal democracy as it is. This one tells us we should be very God-fearing, we should even pray for rain and everything else. And we never get down to say, did we even deconstruct the colonial state? Did we decolonize?
Let's take a
What do we now need to do going forward?
Let's take a break. It's 26 minutes to 8. Cyprian Nyamwamu is the director of Future of Kenya Foundation. He's here. He's telling us, people. Our problem is not Ruto must go, Raila must come, Raila must go. It's not Uhuru, it's not Kibaki, it's not Moi, it's not even Jomo, it was not Jaramogi, it was not Tomboya. Our problem, system established by the colonialists.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
With the director of Future of Kenya Foundation, Cyprian Nyamwamu, who says our problem lies deeper than just looking at our current political leaders. But then, what you are alleging here, Cyprian, is that all these have been indoctrinated and maybe they've even been called at some point and given their brief and told you shall go and this is what you shall do. But we participate in that process. We go into an election every 5 years. We then endorse. If you want to call these people the choice of the colonial master, then we endorse the choice of the colonial master and say that you have the authority to rule over us. Is that what you're saying?
It is, but if you look at the elections that have been happening over the last 10 years in Africa, the truth is that Africans have walked out of those elections. Nigeria has just concluded an election where they had 95 million registered voters, and only 27 million participated in the election. The president, Tinubu, only got 8.8 million votes.
Elect.
The president-elect. There's a case that has been filed in court. And that is not even 10% of the registered voters. I'm not talking of 10% of the total population. I'm talking about just not even 10% of the registered voters, 95 million. What is the statement? Here in Kenya, last year, it's just 7 months ago, 8.4 million registered voters refused to go to the booth and cast the ballot. What are they saying? Democracy, liberal democracy, does not produce the goods. So, if liberal democracy does not produce the goods, what then is going to produce the goods? And I want to suggest as follows, that between 1990 and 2007, those were 17 years, probably more, those were 17 years where there was a tripartite that was actually setting the agenda, decolonizing and moving the country forward. That tripartite alliance collapsed. So the tripartite alliance had the secular civil society on the one hand, there was the religious civil society on the other, and then there was the progressive political opposition. When these three forces came together, they always set the agenda for political, economic, and social progress, peace and prosperity. That is the alliance that collapsed. That alliance was capable of mobilizing Kenyans in every village. And if you look at Kenya since 2007, after the ICC and all that transpired, there hasn't been any structured political or civic education. So Kenyans...
Was that alliance moving us away from that colonial system? Was that alliance speaking the way you're speaking today and saying our problem is we need to deconstruct that system? Or was that alliance saying we need to remove the current leadership, bring in a new constitution, but still the structure, the mainframe of the system?
That alliance was not, it didn't become as radical and revolutionary as you would have wanted, but it was the nursery. It was the nascent nursery where people were starting to say that we need to reform. At least the word was reform. We need to reform our education system. We need to reform our governance system. We need to reform our economic policy. We need to deal with the corruption. It is the alliance that said we need devolution.
It was pushing all these things.
It was saying we cannot take on the system head on because we don't have the capability and the resources. But what we do is let us devolve, for example, so that the counties become the engine of economic transformation. That alliance, which Kibaki was a member of, said we need to wean ourselves off borrowing and debt. Because if we do not, then we are actually going to be recolonized. Except that this time round, we are the ones who shall have taken ourselves to the slave driver. So
Cyprian,
that alliance
if
was a reformist. It was not revolutionary, but it was taking us there.
If I'm to buy everything that you've told us, right? Look at then what happened. The people, the ordinary monarchy in Kenya, from the 30s into the 40s into the 50s, starts pushing and rising against the system. And like you've told us, then the owners of the system actually pick up some people and they go and take them to the UK and they work with them here and they make sure that those are the ones that take over this new conversation. Basically take over the resistance by the people. I'd put it to you, this alliance that you're calling here the tripartite, the religious civil society, the secular civil society, and an organized opposition was the same kind of thing. It was Nyaparas who had been overtaken or taken over by the system to take over the clamor by the ordinary Kenyan to change the system. Why am I saying that? These civil society organizations were heavily funded by the owners of the system, and you will not deny that. These civil society organizations are the ones who also got into positions of authority, into government, and into public service. And that's why nowadays we ask ourselves, what happened to our previous reformists?
Yes.
They're in government. They were taken over. They were the Nyaparas of the system.
Let me respond in the following fashion. When Kibaki came to power in 2002, December, riding on the forces that I have named the Tripartite Alliance, the first thing that Kibaki did was to look east. That looking east is partly why we were able to get ourselves out of the economic morass that had been existing. It is the reason Kibaki was able to revive the economy. It is the reason we were able to do some infrastructure. It is the reason we actually funded our budget 80%. It is the reason we actually became a global icon. Even the late Hugo Chavez was actually quoting Kibaki and Kenya in the United Nations Assembly. In terms of our country that was so dependent on foreign aid, within the period of 6 years, managed to pull itself to a position where it could be able to raise local revenue, balance its budget, and fund a lot of development programs. Even if we were getting funding from the East, it was concessional funding, it was funding that allows you to build things. The problem with the West, and I see David Ndii, who was part of us, but who is a dyed-in-the-wool, really Washington consensus believer and evangelist. You can see that we have abandoned the East and gone back to the West again to restart that engagement, which is, within 5 years, I can tell you, is going to completely cripple this country. We don't have policy space to innovate. We do not have ability to shape alternatives and strategy, and it's going to be very problematic. So my response to you is this. The reformist veneer, can I call it, or the emblem we used of reform, had a lot of radicals within it. And the policy choices that were made by that generation of leadership was actually creating the steps towards creating an economy and a political system in East Africa that was going to become, the shining light for a lot of African countries. We've since abandoned that. And after 2007, things have only been going now south, in my view.
When you talk of colonialism, you're essentially talking about spheres of influence.
Yes.
Now, would you agree with me that America was a colony of Britain?
Yes, it was.
I was waiting for you to say it wasn't, but clearly it was. Now, we know what they did.
There, yes.
Yes, we know the fight for independence. Now, would you then say that given the shackles that you speak of, that colonialists dig deep into the very, very sinews of nations and keep a stranglehold, would you then say that Britain still has a stranglehold on America, and that everything we see America doing because of that colonial past? The reason why I'm going with this one here, I'm taking it to the Commonwealth. Okay, countries that are part of the Commonwealth, some still recognize the Queen as a sovereign leader. But what I'm pointing to is how they have grown and developed. Would you say that these economies, as you see them, that the colonial mentality or the colonial struggle that you speak of disadvantaged them? And if it didn't, what did they do, the people who rose up as leaders? My argument is, I come back to Africa, I look at Botswana, a protectorate. Botswana doesn't have the same problems as we do. I look at America now as a superpower after the Second World War, and I'm looking at this few of instances in the Philippines, in Southern Korea, in Japan, and I look at these economies. So the conversation about colonialism and what it does, it seems to me there are some countries who have seen it as an enabling environment in which they can actually build themselves. If these people have insisted they must give us help, or we'll take what they give us, but we'll turn it around.
Make it work for us.
Precisely.
The case of America, and that's a very, you pose something that we need to reflect on there. America was established as an extension of the empire, but the people went there and killed the Red Indians and killed everybody. Now said we want to free ourselves from you guys. America was a sponsored force, political entity. And what happened is that these were Saxons.
It was a settler colony.
It was a settler colony,
yes. But
it is not the Red Indians who were fighting for independence from Britain. It was the very Saxons. It was the very Saxons, like Smith in Zimbabwe, who were like Smith was saying the same thing. I want to now free myself from you, Britain. Even if you are the one who sent me here, I now want to free myself from you.
I no longer want to be answerable.
I no longer want to be answerable to you. That's exactly what America did. So these Saxons, Anglo-Saxons who had gone over there, killed everybody with the diseases and the military power, occupied those territories, now claimed that this is their land and they want to free themselves from their sponsor. That's exactly what happened.
And Australia?
Exactly for Australia. You kill the Aborigines and everybody else there in Canada and all these places. Then you say, I want to free myself from you and establish myself as an independent power. Let me just finish that thought. It is not the same case for us or India. You have to differentiate those colonies.
How different are they, Cyprian?
Fundamental. Because what happened to the case, these were Anglo-Saxons who had gone to America, killed the people there with whose support?
With their mother support.
Go to Argentina. Who went to Argentina and killed the people in Argentina? It was the Spanish. Then the Spanish established a political community and continue to relate with Spain, now not as a colony, but as an independent economy and political system. That is not the same case with Kenya. So I think you need to see that for what it is. The settler colonies were not taken over at independence by the original people, if I can call them that. It is not the natives that took over. It was the Spanish now having a name called Argentina. It was the British and the English calling themselves, and the Irish calling themselves now Americans. They are not Americans. These are Europeans, Anglo-Saxons who are out there now saying, no, look, listen, we are not part of you. We are independent. But coming back to Kenya so that we conclude, because we have to tell ourselves, what then do we need to do?
Exactly.
To really move forward. In that article, I propose 3 things. First is that we must use our education system. We must use religion. For example, we must use our liberal democracy to start the deconstruction of the state. How do we do that? For example, we cannot use elections to elect criminals, drug dealers, and the people who do not have any alternative ideology to decolonize and establish this as an economic viable state. We must use religion like they have used it in Latin America to talk about liberation theology. We cannot continue to use religion the way it was brought to us, that, prepare to go to heaven. We must now use religion to ask the questions of justice and equality, and how we then use taxes to liberate everybody from hunger and poverty and the squalor of it. We must use our education to empower our citizens to think and innovate and invent, because those are the three things that have been used by every other country that came out of colonialism to liberate themselves. Indeed. We cannot continue to use these three things and leave them intact in the interest of the powers and the owners of the system. We must now engineer these three items and use them to actually empower citizens to rise against the system, so that we have to innovate. India, which was a colony of Britain, innovated its education, and they said we are going to go technical. So you go to their IT centers and institutes of technology, they are now ruling all over the world. They are running the Silicon Valley, and they are running, the British Prime Minister is Indian. Can you see that?
Well, there's a Pakistani who's about to lead Scotland.
So we can use, what have they done? They have done three things. They have innovated their liberal democracy and ensured that the people who get to office using elections and everything else are honest, competent people. We can use Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, which was also a colony of Britain. What did they do there? Lee Kuan Yew brings what he calls MPH. I was there just 4 months ago. They say Singapore is going to be run on the basis of meritocracy, on the basis of pragmatism, and on the basis of honesty. So the men and women who we are going to allow in any of our institutions must meet these three preconditions. But what else? Every citizen of this country must abide by this ethos. Okay,
and I know that the clock is running down, but here we are, and we're saying, so if we take this thesis that you prefer, and we say, okay, something then obviously needs to be done about it. Like we said, there are citizens who participate every so often in an exercise which guarantees who your leader is going to be. Whether you do it minimally, whether it is a percentage of the population who has registered, the exercise still carries out. So from what I hear is that we've been doing this blindly. So let's say that this knowledge then now has been served on the plates of every citizen. What's supposed to happen next?
Those three things, so that we focus on those three, I'm recommending that we are not going to start saying now throughout religion, but can we discuss theology that is liberation theology?
Okay.
Can the clergy in this country and Christians start to ask the fundamental questions about how a president and a deputy president and whatever can use 802 million on their spouses and vehicles and all that kind of thing when people are dying for lack of food? Can we ask these questions in terms of liberation theology?
Okay.
Can we ensure that anybody who holds public office, whether elected, appointed, nominated, is somebody who actually promotes the values of our independence and our liberation, so that liberal democracy does not become a conveyor belt of getting the Sonkos and all the riffraff and all the criminals and all the corrupt into office.
Cyprian.
I don't want to be sued. So what I'm saying,
before you speak.
Yes. So I'm saying that can we ensure that the conveyor belt, the liberal democracy conveyor belt, does not then convey into power all the incompetence and the malcontents of our system? There is a way it has been used in every other democracy to ensure that the people who get to office are actually men and women who promote the interests of that country. And finally, we are saying that we have to relook at our education system so that we actually give our children, for example, and I've concluded now on those three as a basis of moving forward. Why do we test our children and grade them that they have A in English.
What should we give them instead?
You should give them A in Kiswahili.
No, they should be studying and being examined in things that can be able to add value to our society.
Cyprian, our time is up, but I have to ask this question for thought, not for response. When we talk about the national government, they're not difficult to hit. It's a big thing, many mistakes. County systems, where you could argue locals have a bigger say. They have money. They may say it's not enough. How do we hold them accountable? Because those are our people.
Yes.
The county I come from, those are my people.
Using the same three things: religion,
Religion, education, and the liberal system. Who we get to office, and then that liberal democracy tells us about what citizens' role is in governance. How can they allow a governor who's their son and cousin and all that to steal from them and bring the money to Nairobi?
I think what I've taken picked out of all these things, your message hidden among all these things, your key message is liberal democracy.
And we're going to
You're a
ask
liberal
him,
Democrat.
Who funds?
No,
funds
liberal
his
democracy is a problem.
institution?
We need, unless it is retweaked and re-engineered, it is actually a problem.
It's also a problem.
It is the fundamental problem.
You'll come next time we'll
Thank you
discuss
so
it.
much.
Cyprian Nyamwamu, thank you very much for joining us. Cyprian is the director of the Future of Kenya Foundation. He's been our guest